Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today at TRACCS webinar series. We're going to give people a minute to get off their prior meetings and jump on this webinar. Today, we're going to be speaking about data from trees to tracks. This webinar is by Summit Infrastructure. Just give us a couple minutes and we will start briefly. Very well. So thank you everyone for being here. My name is Andrea. I'm here from TRACCS with Leslie Barnes from WGD from TRACCS as well, and Nafa Duib from Pomerlo. And we welcome you to this session of TRACCS webinar series, Data from Trees to Tracks by Summit Infrastructure. While we wait for other people to log in, we want to do a little bit of housekeeping and let you guys know what other events are happening here at TRACCS. As you may already be aware of, we are planning a Canadian Transit Rail delegation to the Czech Republic. This will happen in June, from June 4 to the 11th, is it? I'm sorry about dates, I have to confirm. But we are inviting the Canadian transit agencies and delegations and Canadian contractors to join a tour through the Czech Republic. We're going to be introduced to agencies and government officials. We're going to have technical tours, and we're going to be meeting with the Ministry of Transport, Prague Public Transit Company, Pilsen City Transport Company, Ostrava City Transit, and the objective of the tour is to share best practices between our countries and create some, hopefully some really strong business partnerships. If you are interested in joining, you can email Jen Besensky at jenb@tracks.ca. The information can be sent to you if you want to send us an email. We are also, of course, promoting Rail Day for 2023. This year, we'll do an indoor-outdoor transit rail exhibition at the International Center. We're selling booths. We still have spaces and sponsorships. General admittance is going to be free. We will also have a conference section. There's going to be 2 days, 3 rooms. We're going to have all these conversations that the industry needs, and we're going to have a showroom and demos outdoors, and also a little bit of networking with a cocktail. So be sure to visit tracks.ca/TRD23 for tickets and to get your booths. Now, coming back to where we're here, Leslie, today we're talking with Thomas Spy from Summit Infrastructure. He's going to present data from trees to tracks and how utilizing data can keep boots off the ballast, drive efficiency, and save money.
Thank you, Andrea. So as a brief introduction for Thomas, Thomas is the Managing Director of Summit Infrastructure. He has an established background in rail infrastructure construction in the UK, both on client and constructor side. In 2016, Thomas moved to Canada, and since then he's worked on successful bids for several major light rail projects, as well as on-site construction management, testing, commission, and closeout. For Thomas, these experiences highlighted an opportunity to utilize products and technologies from across the globe to challenge the current way Canadian rail operators and construction contractors were monitoring and constructing rail infrastructure. In 2019, Thomas founded Summit Infrastructure to give companies a competitive edge for successful rail infrastructure project delivery. And with that, we're going to turn it over to Thomas for his presentation.
Thank you very much. That's quite the introduction. Morning, afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well. Let me just quickly share my screen here with you all. Hopefully everyone can see this one. Is that coming up for everyone?
Yes, it is.
Yes, perfect. So thank you very much for the introduction. As I said, Thomas Bai, Managing Director and owner of Summit Infrastructure. Presentation today, we're going to go through some of the value we see in collecting data from across the rail infrastructure. That's from the tracks, line side infrastructure, onboard vehicles, the value we've seen in that, some of the challenges and some of the projects we've worked on with clients across Canada in the last few years, and then where we think we can go with this as an industry and as a group to really utilize the value of this. So as a very quick overview of what we're going to cover, it's basically the why, the what, the how, and the when of collecting data on and around your rail infrastructure. We've got some examples of projects previously that we can share. Obviously, I hope you can appreciate we do have quite a lot of interesting projects on the go at the moment that are client property and client data. So we can't unfortunately share everyone's problems and interesting things with the wider group, but the ones we can share, we're happy to just talk about. So sort of second half of the presentation focuses on geospatial data, how that can be integrated into your railway operations, design, planning, and management, and our kind of thing. Digital twin is all over LinkedIn. It's lots of buzzwords at the moment, and equally drone surveys are a pretty big kind of buzzword. So we wanted to sort of, highlight some of the features of that, how that data is useful, where it might not be useful, and where it's very useful. And then the next steps, industry collaboration and AI, like artificial intelligence and machine learning. We really started to look at this as to how we can utilize data that we collect to inform better and safer operations going forward. That's a really interesting topic that hopefully we can generate some discussion on. And if we can get industries and operators to collaborate, the more data you put in, the more information you generally get out. So sort of first stage is, why do you collect data from your railway? Now, when we talk about data in this context, I'm talking about a wide range of everything. That's from individual cross level of a tie, as you can see on that image at the top there. That's one of our sensors out on a track, which is detecting cross level at that location every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes, every hour, depending what that client wanted. So on a macro level, that's your kind of high resolution, high accuracy data, single points, which obviously you can roll that out down the track to get cross level, twist, and we'll come on to some of the other things we can pick up. So understanding the scope or the problem that you're trying to solve is key to choosing the right data collection means, we like to say. Like, we're not trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. And we're not saying there's no place for human inspection still, but we've generally found over the last couple of years, data collection, like on-site sensors, on-site cameras, geospatial, like drone surveys, generally fall into the categories sort of listed there. Long-term asset management, a good example of that at the moment. We're working on a project where we will either manually collect or LiDAR scan an entire client's railway. This will then be used to inform gauge clearance issues. So we overlay LiDAR data or survey trolley data. We can fit shapes through that based on the dynamic envelope of the train. That would then gives that client the ability to predict what track maintenance and track design changes would do automatically for envelope clearance. So if you were tamping or slewing in a curve, for example, you type in to the software in the back end, we're going to slew this track 2 inches, 20 millimeters, whatever units you want to work in, and it automatically detects whether you've got a clash. That's kind of long-term asset management, big volume, big data, across a long stretch. You've then got emergency monitoring. This is something we find often comes up with the Class 1 railway clients. Spring, melt, culverts failing, embankment erosion. We'll come on to the examples of this later. That is quick data that you need to know you basically want to replace a person on site with equipment. It's safer, it's cheaper, it automates the process. Line-side construction is another area that we find a lot of useful or good reason to use this system. Traditionally, I know the various transit agencies in the light rail world all have different means and methods of doing this, but you know, the Class 1 railways have a lot of people putting pipelines underneath them. They have a lot of people doing municipal sewer works, and traditionally, you would be required to go and set up a total station, have a man on track or lady on track, I should say. Go and do survey targets. You've got to clear them of snow. You've got to have a flagger. By replacing that with sensors, you automate that process. It's safer, as we say to a lot of our clients. You can't get run over by the train if you're not stood in the middle of the track. It automates alerts, and it gives people like near real-time data on key track geometry measures. So that's cross level, twist, and a daily settlement profile. Extreme weather kind of falls underneath the emergency monitoring, I guess, is a similar thing. Again, high risk weather events that may be forecast, like, you know, the atmospheric rivers we had in BC last year, things like that, where you either want to respond afterwards to check that your infrastructure is still stable and safe, or whether you see it coming and you want to preempt things like flood warning, water depth, flow rate in culverts, flow rate under bridges. Design feedback is one that I think got a big opportunity to really kind of help the industry here. Things like comparing a site that may have had ballast mat or geogrid put underneath the ties to a site that doesn't. You can monitor things like soil moisture content to pick up how well that substructure is draining. You can then do a comparison between different sites and then start to inform your design in the future. Hey, this idea worked, this idea didn't. And then I'll really come on to this later, but the idea of a digital twin, you know, a true digital twin in our view, both gives you a detailed view, like 3D model, render, whatever you want to call it, point cloud of your network. But if you can also pull in real-time data on temperature, track geometry, OCS parameters, stuff like that, that's where they really become useful. You can start to look at what's going on in your network without having to be out there. So that kind of covers the why people monitor. What, you know, is another key parameter for us. Is like, what are you trying to measure or monitor? What's your problem that you have? The picture here on the left, as an example, is a bridge that we monitored last year, and some of the guys are actually out there today, as it happens, reinstalling this. Now the water's flowing again here in Alberta, unfrozen. So this client here had a problem with beaver dams that would build up on the upstream side of the bridge, effectively dam the bridge, and you could start to see both movement in the bridge piers as well as movement with track geometry over the top. Obviously, that's a high risk site, high impact site. If something derails on an open bridge like that, they've got a big problem. So for this site, we measured both the movement of the piers in the X and Y axis. So that is effectively tilt left to right and front to back. And then we also did cross-level twist and settlement profiles over the top. Dynamic voiding on the approach, so that's the actual bounce of the track as the train approaches to try and pick up if that hump in the road where you can get broken rail as you transition from a bridge deck to a normal embankment. And then this client as well had the full package. We also did water depth with flood alerts, although the flood alert in this case, as you can see, the height of the structure is not going to flood, but it was more a case of how deep the water was getting on the upstream side. So that's a kind of very specific site, you know, what they're trying to monitor. As we talked about before, your larger scale, we tend to find you collect data in stages. Large scale gauge clearance, LiDAR scans of entire routes, slope change detection. So that would be flying a slope alongside a railway, an embankment, a retaining wall. You fly that maybe once a year, once a quarter, monthly, depending on your risk and your movement levels. And then you start to narrow down where your problem really is. As a business, we would obviously love if everyone censored every bridge, every culvert, every structure. Not going to happen. We know that's not going to happen. So we look at collecting data across, say, like a kilometer, 2 kilometers, saying, hey, your problem areas are here, here, and here. Maybe we should go and censor those locations if they're particularly high risks. Typically, we find the biggest headaches for operational revolve around switches, automatic switches that go into fault mode, or won't throw automatically from the control center. Typically, that's associated, we find, with that dynamic voiding. They start voiding and need tamping or need ballast packing. That voiding gets worse. Then as the voiding happens, the geometry changes, the switch blade can't close properly, then you get a switch in fault. You have to send someone out. By monitoring the switches, we're able to start to inform, hey, these are starting to void more than the others. Maybe that needs attention first, and build up that asset management plan. Bridges, as you can see, I appreciate, a lot of the audience here is in the LRT sort of light transit area, where hopefully a lot of your bridges don't look like that one on the left. But for the class ones and the freight railways, they have a lot of legacy structures, a lot of legacy culverts that I think, if people were honest, could probably do with quite a lot of maintenance, but being able to keep an eye on them, to see what's moving, to see what's failing before it really fails is key. And as we touched on before, adjacent construction impacts. If you've got someone doing, say, line side piling or line side retaining walls, you're most worried about cross level and twist. That's ultimately, what would put your train off the track. If you're going underneath, you're maybe worried about settlement or consolidation of the ballast, or voids opening up underneath. So yeah, that's kind of like what we typically measure. How? Again, this is, we like to think that we can replace or supplement a lot of the skilled human eye, but ultimately that final decision, for the rail, where you can't beat someone going out and doing that final inspection to make that judgment call on what is the data telling us and how is this going to affect the safety of our operations. So there's still definitely a place for the skilled human eye, but they can't be everywhere all the time. And as the title says, our kind of slogan is keeping boots off the ballast. It's fundamentally safer to not be on track than it is to be on track. I know there are various ways we can put protection in, we can put closed lines in, we can turn all the power off. But if you're not there, you can't get hit by the train, you can't trip over the rail, you can't have an accident on the site. So by installing sensors on the track, these provide that real-time data as if someone was there to help inform where to target and where to view. Particularly relevant for track geometry faults, cross-level, twist, particular, where you would typically have to go out either with your survey bar or a track trolley, or maybe set up a total station to do the monitoring. This is on track for maybe an hour to do the setup. It's then calibrated and set up, and it just pushes the data out every 10 minutes, every 15 minutes, every 5 minutes, whatever the client needs, without that human being in the danger zone. So yeah, the how we use a range of sensors, as a background to the business and the information. We only manufacture one sensor in-house, which we'll come on to in a second, but we have basically collated what we feel is the best technology from around the world. So we buy equipment in from the UK, Switzerland, Australia, a small bit from down in the States. Most of our suppliers are UK and European based. And then what we do is collate all of that information into one user portal. So as I said at the bottom there, data integration and access is key. Feedback before from clients has been, yes, we know you can go and buy a sensor that does rail temperature, and we know you can buy a sensor that might, or a camera that might give you real-time pictures in a tunnel. But you end up with like 10 different logins across 10 different systems with 10 different passwords, and ultimately no one really looks at it as a whole picture. So what we do is we try and pull all this together so we can combine air temperature, rail temperature, structure monitoring. So does your track geometry on your structure change because of the heat? In our experience, probably yes. Or is your track structure changing not related to heat? So therefore, do you have a more fundamental problem, with ballasted track on a bridge deck moving, but it doesn't follow temperature trends? And we'll come on to that in a minute with an interesting project we did a few years ago. Once you've got that raw data, which typically comes through as numbers, so for a cross-level reading, we represent that as cross-level. We do that by knowing where our sensor is placed. We know the effective length of a railway tie, and we know your track gauge. So the background algorithms, written by someone far more intelligent than myself, can represent that as cross-level rather than just degrees of movement. Cross-level and twist obviously then gets used as you would see it from like a track geometry train or a track geometry survey. Flooding, we typically do, or water depth, we do in obviously meters or feet. Slope stability, we give in degrees of movement or in millimeters of movement, depending what you want. But then what's a really good innovation, when you can see the picture here, this is up, for anyone that knows the freight lines in the Rockies, that is up near the spiral tunnels on a CP bit of infrastructure. That little camera sits there and is linked to the on-site sensors. So should there be a failure of one of those embankments or a debris flow event, in this case, it was a fairly simple setup. If a tilt sensor passed a certain degree, so had been effectively knocked over, the client would get both a text message and email alert. They would also get a picture from site. These pictures can also be used to automate like long-term change detection in slope stability, which is a very interesting area. But yeah, that's still being kind of developed by some companies we work with in Italy and also some of the research universities. And then drones, as we said before, they collect the big picture. They're great. You know, everyone likes to see them flying around, but they cover the big areas to give you that sort of background map. When, you know, frequency of data collection is very much related to the nature of the problem and what you're trying to solve. More is not always better. That's something we always say. Clients are typically like, oh, we want data every minute. We want data every second. Great, you can, but what are you trying to measure? You know, if you're looking at rail temperature, for example, as a critical thing, every 15 minutes is probably more than enough. If you're trying to operate a railway whilst someone is directional drilling an oil pipeline underneath it, probably yes, every minute is more what you need. If you're looking at long-term asset management, is this structure moving? Is this embankment moving? Maybe once every 30 minutes, once every hour is probably more than enough data. And key thing to highlight with any survey data, whether that's traditional, drone survey, on-track sensors, accuracy and repeatability is key. If you can't repeat the problem, you don't know whether it was the sensor moving or your survey control points not being set up correctly, you can't compare like with like. So you have to have a fixed point and you have to be able to repeat the data consistently. So I'll go through a few case studies quickly. This one we found particularly interesting with some of our transit agency customers. This, obviously, as you can see there, that is a graph of rail temperature from just a few days ago here in Calgary. As you can see, we are getting big swings already. We are probably at the 40 to 50 degree true rail temperature swing there. As I'm sure a lot of you know, the whole thing around neutral temperature and you know, laying temperature is key to try and avoid track buckles in the summer and avoid weld breaks in the winter. So this can be used, this little sensor there on the left is the one we do manufacture in-house ourselves. Either connects via a LoRaWAN network or via a satellite network, depending what you need. Simply is a magnetic device that clips on the side of the rail, GPS enabled, so you can move it around your site, and that translates to a map-based portal and gives you real-time information on your rail temperature. You can set alerts up. So if you know you have a problem once your rail temperature gets above a certain point, you can trigger those alerts. So maybe you could start putting slow orders in. Maybe you could start sending people out to check for buckles. But then what I think is probably a more interesting example is you can use this with other sensors to start to build up a long-term plan for hot weather track management. So what we've done before with clients is we've actually measured in real time the push of a curve as it moves in the heat. So we put a laser measure sensor on the outside or the inside of a curve on a fixed point, and then we correlate track temperature to lateral movement. So that then allows clients to say, okay, previously we thought when air temperature was at 30 degrees, we added 15 degrees to that. We assumed our rail temperature would be around 45. According to our original design, when we laid the track, we should be fine, or maybe we're not fine. But by actually measuring what's going on, you can either use that as a real-time alert system, or you can start to think, okay, so this curve at this part of our network doesn't actually move as much as we think it did, so we're fine there. And then this curve or this area of track is moving a lot more than we thought it did in the heat. So now we know that might need restressing, it might need some rail cut out, or we know now we need to put a slow order on the track for safety at maybe 28 degrees air temperature. So you can start to build up this picture across the network. And we obviously work with clients to whether it's ballasted track, or your sleeper spacing, your tie spacing is, sorry, direct fixation track, transitions between slab track and ballasted track, and how they're all moving around in the heat. So yeah, basic example, how hot is it? More complex example, start to build up that true picture of how your infrastructure reacts in the heat, and then how you can change the design going forward. Here is an example of an under track drilling job. This is millimeter cross level change in a tie. You see very small data movement here, but this effectively over a course of a few days shows that cross level changing in real time. That level of movement almost guaranteed to just be linked to thermal. Twist, as you can see, that's a simple calculation that is sensor 1 to sensor 2, or sensor 1 to sensor 3 or 5, depending on what your distance that you're worried about with twist is. Obviously, the class 1s and the freight railways are generally worried about their however many feet, 13, 11, 32. Everyone has a slightly different concern. So we just space the sensors that far apart, or do the calculation between that far. That graph at the top you can see there is effectively each sensor 1 to 2's twist, sensor 2 to 3's twist. And what you're looking for there is that they're following a trend, they're matching each other. If they stay matching each other, you don't have too much to worry about. The track's moving as one. If these start to diverge, you've got a big twist fault developing. That's when you should start to be a bit more concerned. Settlement down the bottom, this is a calculation. I won't bore everyone with the details behind it, but a common question we get asked is, can you measure settlement via a sensor? The true surveyor's answer is no. We can't, we're not a geo-referenced total station survey. What we do is, if you imagine the y-axis is left to right, if you were stood on a tie, the x-axis is front to back, pitching up, pitching down. That's then used, this is through the Sensive system that we use with those guys. They've come up with a very good system there to calculate if it pitches up, you're heaving. If you're pitching down, obviously your track's coming down. So we know the length, we know what each sensor's done in that pitch and dip, and we give a daily settlement profile. If anyone's interested in the details behind that and how it compares to traditional survey, total station survey, etc., there's been lots of testing on it. The quick summary is that is a very useful daily trend to see if you have a problem with heave or settlement. Water, so as we said, a quick case study here. This was that example down there is volumetric water content, so that is effectively soil moisture content, and that was external temperature. In this case, this was actually a job which I talked about earlier. We were comparing under track drainage projects to see how that had been. There was 3 sites monitored over a year, and one had had a lot of work done, one had had some sort of experimental stuff done, and one had nothing done. And we measured rail temperature, soil moisture content, air temperature, twist, cross level, and settlement. And as I'm sure you can probably guess, the site that had no work done moved a lot. This was up in northern Alberta, where you do get a big freeze. These sites with the geogrid and the drainage drained quicker. You could actually see which side of the embankment it was draining to and from. And you can even see when it rained, because you've got a drop in rail temperature and then a few minutes later a spike in soil moisture. So yeah, that's the kind of more detailed side. And then a more simplistic approach, we can do line side flooding, we can do culvert depth, flow rate. Again, automates depth of water, flow rates, temperature. Temperature is interesting with water. You can tell if it's rained or if it's meltwater in the mountains. Again, all linked into one single portal. So if you're worried about is water depth affecting structure movement, you can tie the two together. This is the camera integration. As I said, not too many light rail networks run through terrain like this, but yeah, essentially, if to put it very crudely, if all those rocks, there's a glacier at the top of that picture on the left there, if all of those rocks come down that channel and knock over a grid of sensors, which you can see a few there's a few more behind us, and there's a few more further up the channel, those fall over, that camera takes a picture. The railway operator can then basically make a judgment call as to whether the line is clear or whether they've got a big problem with rocks on the line. That's something that we are seeing more and more interest with, especially in the mountain terrain for the class 1s. Again, another way of using kind of AI and software, and hopefully this plays, is OCS monitoring. So very different from what we had before. This is a system that uses a fixed camera on top of a train and picks up your basic and fundamental OCS parameters. So we have height, stagger, and arcing and obviously speed. And then from that, it calculates a pantograph to wire force. So we know there's various ways of doing this, and there's lots of people in the industry doing some really, really good work on this. This system that we've decided to partner up with a company called Incremental, which is a UK-based company, is very much designed to be a super easy, low-cost way of doing regular checks. The more times you collect this data, the more information you put in the system, the better your feedback is. So in this example, that data is actually collected with a GoPro that was braced to remain still. So you don't need the $100,000 camera, and you certainly don't need to be modifying into train wiring. So the idea is it's a very easy, simple, quick way to collect regular data on your OCS network to pinpoint faults, whether you've got too much stagger, whether your height's dropping or lowering, or whether you've got arcing problems. So that's kind of I guess, the on-track or on-train sensor data. Very quickly, conscious of time with everyone as well, some questions. The geospatial piece, which is the bigger picture as to how you collect data to potentially inform design decisions or narrow down problem sites. So I won't go through all of this, but LiDAR is obviously a big buzzword in the industry. I say buzzword, it's been around a while, it's very popular. Certainly has its place. We'll share this presentation afterwards, obviously, so you can read all the points. LiDAR is great if you have vegetation and have some money to spend, in our opinion. It's great for certain applications. Where we've gone is more on a photogrammetric survey, still generates point clouds. We can get down to very low or very high accuracy, sorry, 1 centimeter, by tying in control points and survey points. And most importantly, for a lot of clients, we can do it off track, and it's a lot cheaper. We collect the data from one of our fixed wing drones, fly the site. We're not on the railway, we don't need a line closure, but we can still generate point clouds. We still use stuff that can be put into AutoCAD, and that helps inform design decisions. And then also things like cut and fill volumes, if there's been a washout, how much fill you need. And this is also what we use to create renders and images like this. So what we would like to say, a drone survey is not necessarily a digital twin. We see lots of people that go and get a drone survey done and say, hey, look at this. This is a really nice render. It's a digital twin, which of course has just frozen on me because it's just in the middle of the presentation. Apologies for this. It worked fine yesterday. Apologies for this. I'll keep talking. Just because you've got a nice picture doesn't make it a digital twin. In our opinion, a digital twin is something that needs to be updated regularly, needs to be high resolution, high accuracy data, and needs to pull in ideally sensor data or information that's like real time to replicate what's going on the network in real time, but digitally on your computer. Apologies, Andrea. I don't know if you. I have completely frozen, which is always good when we're trying to do a presentation on technology.
Don't worry about the video. Maybe you can come back to that if it works later. Let's continue with the next slide, or maybe you can explain what you wanted to explain.
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to. My PowerPoint has completely frozen, so I can't skip to the next slide either. But whilst I try and unfreeze this, my next slide talked about how we automate change detection from this data. So what we would do with this data is we overfly the site once, and that generates what's called a digital surface model. That gives you a very accurate, effectively 3D terrain map. We then overfly the same site again using our fixed reference points, and the difference between the two, if you have a rock that's moved, you have an embankment that's sunk or slipped, if you have a structure that's moved, we kind of cap this at like a 10 centimeter level of change in order to ensure that we're giving the right data. But you can imagine, embankments and things like that, if it's moved more than 10 centimeters, we can pick that up and automate that change. I do apologize. I am really struggling here. Hopefully this is not going to cause a massive problem.
No problem. Maybe we can allow the audience to think about questions from the previous part.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, good idea whilst I try and do a presentation on technology.
Send me the presentation and I'll see if I can make it work, okay?
It's okay. I think it's just my computer here has run out of. Do apologise for this, everyone. Does anyone have any questions whilst I'm?
We have a quiet audience today. Okay, there's someone hand up. Go ahead, Bash. You can unmute yourself, Bash, and ask your question. Okay.
Oh, I think I am back. If can everyone see this one again?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
There we go. Sorry about that, everyone. So yeah, change detection basically takes the digital surface models, as I said, and highlights area that have moved and tells you automatically how much they've moved. One that may be more interest to the kind of light rail market is you can use a similar technique. This is some proprietary tool that we've developed. You effectively take the height of a tree next to the railway and you can map out where it would land if it was to fall over. Then you categorize them all at a risk level. Will it clash with the railway? Will it not? Will it clear? And that maps that out to either saves the trees that don't need to be cut down and also make sure vegetation management budget go a lot further. And then the bit that I think is really useful, just to finish off here before we get hopefully to some questions, is data on its own is really useful. It helps inform decisions in real time. It increases the safety of people working on the track. It just gives you that bigger picture of what's going on. Data over long term is even better. You can start to see how your infrastructure is dealing with the heat, dealing with the cold. Data that's then combined with like machine learning and AI is potentially to be a really powerful tool, I think, in this industry. And if we can collaborate on data, which I know is a challenge, we as a business must have collected millions of data points now on rail temperature, cross level, twist, dynamic voiding, weather, soil moisture content, all the rest of it. And there are definitely trends. There's definitely trends and information in that data that would be great to be used to inform new construction and new design. Maybe the tie spacing, if we took all the data points from tie spacing that was at 400 mil compared to 600 or 500 mil, which is more stable, which lasts better in terms of a long-term maintenance, and then start to look at these trends and use machine learning and AI to really understand what works well, or simulate if we had as the temperatures seem to be getting hotter in the summer or ice storms seem to be getting more severe. Okay, if we suddenly get a 40-degree drop in temperature overnight, well, that's a bit extreme maybe, or we get to 45-degree plus, what track structure reacts how and what will that do? It's a big step, but if data could be anonymized and shared and pulled from all the different LRTs, the freight railways, and everyone else we work with, the value in that we think is really powerful, to be able to, as an industry, move things forward. Now, appreciate that's something that's not going to be solved on a hour-long presentation, but I think there's potential there to do things like that with the data. Same with OCS, different designs, different tensioning systems, different pole types, what works well, what doesn't work well, in different weather, in different designs, etc. So that hopefully was useful for everyone. Apologies for the crash in the middle there, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask.
Yes, sorry, I was unable to unmute myself before, but now I am. Well, thanks a lot, Thomas, for your presentation. I recall, we've worked together before, so I don't know if you remember in the LRT in Ottawa. But the question on when you said there is a camera fixed on the pantograph on the roof of the train, is there anything that does collect the icing on the OCS? And then how do we deal with that in general? Is it only ice scraper? Is it a dummy pantograph? Do you have any knowledge regarding that? Especially you're in Calgary. I know we have a lot of severe weather here in Calgary and in Ottawa as well. And then we're trying to see what is the best solution to deal with that ice, even on the track or on the OCS itself.
Yeah, so we haven't ever monitored something during an ice storm. I would say we could probably use I'm speaking on behalf of software people here, so don't take my word for it, but I would imagine we could automate the process if you were collecting data frequently enough, that would potentially look at how, is the diameter of that wire increasing effectively? So do you have ice buildup starting to form on the wire? And therefore, could you start to trigger alerts to say there is ice buildup in this section because we can see the shape of the wire has changed potentially? In terms of ways to solve it, pass. How you, whether you run a dummy pantograph in front, maybe that would work. I don't know. I stay away from the technical design of electrics. But yeah, it's a good question. I know obviously it's kind of hot topic. That's a bad analogy. It's an area of interest, with stuff that's happened recently in some of the networks and ice formation. Kind of a bit of a unique challenge to Canada, I would say as well. Other places in the world get cold, but they don't tend to get that freezing rain. Having lived in Ottawa, I do not miss freezing rain now living in Calgary. So yeah, potentially you could detect it. I think that could be an interesting project to do and look at. Obviously, you would need to be running trains to collect that data, or whether you could do it from fixed cameras that were high enough resolution to pick up changes in like wire shape or diameter. That might work as well, which would obviously give you that ability to detect first thing in the morning or when trains weren't running. Yeah, certainly something we could think about. Not guaranteeing it would work, but it'd be an interesting test, that's for sure.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Nafa, you have a question yourself? Go ahead. Oh, you're muted.
Oops, sorry. Thank you, Thomas, for this presentation. It's really interesting, and we feel that we are, no matter what, we are more and more. How we say that? Like we need the data to be able to predict and to maintain and operate. So my question: all these devices that you're showing, are they all like they are all on the same platform, no matter which device you're gonna choose, or it's each device it's on its own whatever software display, or it's all together?
No, that's what we've focused our development on in the last year or so. Is we built a platform that is sensor agnostic. Basically, we have a list of stuff that we know works well, and your daily reports, your live view of data is all on a single login, it's a ArcGIS map-based platform. So you could have a single screenshot that would show you on one login. It could show you rail temperature, track geometry, structure movement, water depth, etc. They are all fed from different hardware and different systems, but you as an end user would see a single login, a single portal for all of that information. That's one of the big challenges that we've overcome, and one of the big feedbacks from industry was there's lots of companies out there trying to sell hardware, and they want you to then use their software. So as I said earlier, you end up with 10 or 15 logins, which in theory shouldn't be a problem, but no one uses them. If you've got to look at your rail temperature and you want to say, okay, so rail temperature is 35 degrees, is that affecting our track geometry? If you then got to open a whole nother website and a whole nother software package, you can't really do that comparison. So yeah, through our service, everything's done through a single login portal. We do, for data ease and data use for both the end client and also to make it cost effective, we generally go for, we give you a smaller history, and then if you need the logs to look at a whole year, we obviously can provide them from a back-end kind of server system, rather than trying to present every reading of every sensor for a year on one portal, because you need to be able to look at this on your phone in the field trackside without waiting 10 minutes for it to load up, kind of thing. So yeah, that hopefully answers that one.
Okay, so from what I'm understanding, you can consult this on your own phone or tablet, right?
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And it should, obviously this audience I know is primarily like light rail transit, everything apart from the fixed well, it is possible, but it's expensive. Everything's available both on a satellite and a cellular network. Obviously the cellular network is significantly cheaper in data fees, but all of those devices we can also run via either Iridium satellite or other communication means to open up, more remote areas. The only one that's a challenge at the moment is fixed cameras. Can be done. It's just, is it cost effective for satellite is a challenge, but one we're working on.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Mafa. We have a couple questions here in the chat. Is it possible to get a copy of the presentation? We'll talk about that later. We have someone thanking, but I have actually a question. You mentioned what is happening with all these different logins and you being able to offer one. Do you think that's the biggest barrier that clients have when using monitoring technology? Is there something else that you see that may play a role here?
Yeah, I mean, we found, I think one of the biggest barriers is people just don't know what's available, what technology is possible. Without upsetting anyone, the railway has got to be traditionally one of the most traditional industries going. It's a lot of, we find, especially in the class 1 freight world, we've always done it like this, so therefore we'll keep doing it like this, and not knowing what technology is out there, or the perception that it is very, very expensive, which it's not. Now the technology price, the hardware costs are always coming down. And then people have tried it before. They might have been sold the dream of some magic sensor that was definitely going to work in a Canadian winter. They spent a lot of money on it. It worked fine when it was warm. Then it snowed and got cold and it all stopped. And there's an inbuilt perception that some of these devices, don't work or don't give the data they need. And then, like you said, it's that ease of access of data. Without kind of, we're happy to talk to anyone after on email or phone if they're interested in a project, but we typically offer this as a service. So it's a full service package. Is tell us what the problem is, we bundle up the devices that are most appropriate, give you that single source login, train you how to use the system. You keep it for a summer, you keep it for a winter, you keep it for however long you need, but it's all in one. I think previously people have gone down the route of buying the hardware, which is great. Then someone leaves, someone changes in the organization, no one remembers the login, it needs calibrating, that kind of stuff, and it gets put in a cupboard and never used again. So it's kind of a combination, I think, so far, but the biggest one we found is people just don't know what's out there. People don't know what's possible, or haven't realized what can be done.
Very good. Here, you have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I appreciate your presentation. I was just wondering, it sounds like collecting the data is one process and then analyzing it is another. If you had a railroad that was relatively remote, could they have somebody on site collect the data regularly and then submit it to you rather than you sending somebody out to do that regularly?
I should say all the data gets fed back via, it's all automated, so it all goes back to the portal automatically.
Oh, sorry.
So you don't need.
I was thinking more along the lines of the drone footage.
Oh, okay, yeah. So if you're looking at the sort of drone mapping, as long as you get the right caliber and accuracy of data in, it can be processed from anything. As long as good going in gives you good results going out. So as long as the data matches what we need and is as good or better than what we would collect for that parameter, absolutely we can, we've realized this pretty quickly, we'd love to go and do drone mapping surveys in, I don't know, Newfoundland or Gaspé Coast in Quebec, but we're in Calgary, and by the time you've paid for some people to go there, it's not a cost-effective solution. So if you've got survey data, especially things like the gauge clearance for track slews and structure clearance, or that first commissioning run, you know, rather than doing the let's stick a bunch of plumbing foam around the side of a high rail and see what fits. You can send the track survey data that can be put into a software package that kind of automates that clearance thing. Obviously, you know, just as a, I guess, contractual thing, you know, if we collect the data, we know it's right, but we can work with people to input data from anything. Yeah.
That's great. I have received a question here. Where do you think the balance between technology and human inspection is?
We see that, you know, as I said in the presentation, that judgment call, which ultimately comes down to, for some events, still needs someone there to make that call. Sometimes you just need to be hands-on, use experience, you know, look at the picture, look at everything around you to make that decision as to whether you keep running or reduce speed or change something. Having said that, the point at which you get to that critical decision, if you have, I don't know, a 20-kilometer network and you've got 2 track inspectors, you can't be everywhere at all times. By collecting that data, you start to narrow down your problem areas. We find that especially with things like switches, you know, there's always those 3 or 4 switches that are always causing problems, and everyone's always out adjusting them, tamping them, changing the settings. But if you start to monitor them, you build up that picture of pre-failure. Okay, so we know it's failed or it's gone into fault at 3 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. Okay, well, let's look back at the last 24, 48 week, month data. Okay, we've got a cross-level fault developing. That's why it's gone into fault. The dynamic voiding at the switch end has increased. That must be what it is. Now now we need to go and tamp it or reballast it or repack it. Hopefully that solves the problem. You monitor it afterwards. You know, still need that person probably at the point of failure. You're not going to go and reset something blindly, just, you know, without seeing it. But it allows you to know what's happened and know what's coming up. So that's kind of where we see the balances. And then in the construction side, under track drilling, under track pipeline work, that just removes a huge cost and a huge level of risk of having generally non-railway people. You know, your general construction surveyors aren't always familiar with the railway. By removing them from that site, you've just decreased your risk level massively. So that's kind of where we see the balance.
That is fantastic. Thank you. Now I want to invite everyone to think of your last question. We're coming to the end of the presentation. So if you have any other questions right now, Hanif, go ahead, unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you, Thomas, for your presentations. One question from mine is, how do you verify the accuracy of this data? Like, is this any calibration is required on sensor sites, or any maintenance or something, or alignment or something that needs to be done regularly to make sure that the data produced is accurate?
Yes, so good question. Everything is obviously calibrated and things before it goes out on site. You know, as I sort of said earlier, it's worth, if we look at the track geometry, we are measuring change from day 0. We're not referencing like a traditional survey to the world, if that makes sense. So the sensors are calibrated and checked before they go out on site. Say your measure cross level is the easiest example. We set them on site, we take a cross level reading, we then set the sensor data to offset, basically to match the current track geometry reading. And they are then very accurate. They are basically very accurate tilt sensors, and it's the background calculation that do it. So they get checked regularly. We have a lot more access to data in the background to check readings and temperature offsets and stuff like that. But yeah, it's measuring change from day 0. So you either say that on day 0, you're at 0, so effectively flat. How much has it moved from then? Or you mirror track geometry. Things like temperature, they get calibrated and tested every time before they go out. So we obviously have various ways of measuring temperature on a test section of rail, and we check that they're all accurate to each other. Cameras is more of a resolution, you know, focus thing. Maintenance wise, they're very good at surviving most things. We've had various jobs out, pack monitoring jobs that have lasted 2 or 3 years for clients in Class 1 freight yards, and other than a direct hit from a tamper, they'll survive grinding, tamping, general track maintenance. So yeah, that's, I mean, if you need more information, obviously on the details of it, let me know and we can sort of give you more. But that's a quick summary. Yes, they all need calibrating and checking, but once they're on site, they generally sit there and do their thing.
Okay, and can it be installed on embedded track as well?
Sorry, say that again.
Can it be installed on embedded track as well?
Yes, you can put them on. Embedded.
Yeah.
Embedded, you wouldn't be able to install any like rail temperature sensor. You could measure, we have done it for a client before, you can measure the entire slab moving, but yeah, you can't measure, where there's not space in an embedded track to get the sensor on the rail web, unfortunately. So you'd be looking at the movement of the whole slab or the whole section, and you would effectively use each cast slab as like a giant tie, and that's how you would use take your readings. Obviously there's some limitations to that, but yeah, you can't, you've got to have some space to get the sensor on either a tie or a rail web to attach it. So yeah,
Okay,
unfortunately that gets tricky.
Very well. Thank you for your questions. Thank you, Thomas. This has been really informative. We have some messages here thanking you for a well-organized, effectively covered key points. So we are really, really grateful for your time, for your experience. I have put Thomas's information in the chat, and you can see it on screen. If you want to ask him any further questions, please reach out to him. You know, he can really deliver on the information and offer you a good plan. Now, Thomas, thank you very much. And I want to do a little bit of announcements for the people who were not here at the beginning. We are we still have some spots at Rail Day for those of you who want to get a booth. We have a couple more sponsorship opportunities as well. Please be sure to reach out to us. You can go to traccs.ca/TRD23 or send me an email, andrea.r@traccs.ca. You've been receiving emails from me all this time. However, I'm going to put it here in the chat for you as well. And we also have an upcoming event, Trains with Brains. So this will be a presentation by Transmission Dynamics on Wednesday, May the 17th. If you want to register, you can go to traccs.ca. And as I said, thank you so much, Thomas. This is really interesting and really valuable to all of us.
No problems. Thank you everyone for your time. And yeah, as Andrea said, if anyone's got any questions, feel free to email or give us a call.
Yes, we will share your contact info with everyone after the meeting as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks,
Have a good
Thomas.
rest of your day.
Thank you, Thomas.
You too.
Thanks.
Have a good day.
Bye. Good. Thank you for organizing that.